Well, what have you done with the president? Who was that man speaking last night? Well, tonight, the world is reacting to U.S. President Trump's address to the U.S. Congress. Was it a Trump reset or a Trump trick? I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
It's been a little over a month since my inauguration. We have begun to drain the swamp of government corruption. I'm going to bring back millions of jobs, and we will soon begin the construction of a great wall along our southern border. We are also taking strong measures to protect our nation from radical Islamic terrorism. The time for small thinking is over. The time for trivial fights is behind us. My job is not to represent the world. My job is to represent the United States of America.
Tonight, from the U.S. Capitol to the beer tents of Germany, political roasting is a tradition on Ash Wednesday, but this year, Donald Trump is taking some serious punches.
You can run a campaign like Donald Trump, but we won't do that. Chancellor Merkel isn't my favorite candidate, but right now we've nothing better.
Well, welcome to the program, everyone. We begin the day asking, is this the new normal yet again? Ever since Donald Trump took office as U.S. president, the world has been confronted with one political riddle after another. Trump bombarding the public with abrasive, in-your-face attacks on practically every established rule and institution. At the same time, all the president's men, his cabinet, telling the world America's commitment remains. Nothing has changed. Well, if you watched the U.S. president speak to Congress last night, you were not alone if you felt puzzled yet again. Calm, collected, staying on script, the Donald Trump who spoke last night sounded like a different person, his advisors even hinting that this marks a reset. But the content behind the new presidential face, it is all too familiar. For Europe and the rest of America's allies, the new normal hasn't changed one bit. Our coverage begins tonight inside the U.S. Capitol.
Privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Presidential and softer. Some even say President Donald Trump's first address to a joint session of Congress was kind. The usually unpredictable U.S. leader sounded more inclusive, opening his speech with a message to his opponents.
I am here tonight to deliver a message of unity and strength, and it is a message deeply delivered from my heart.
Even with this more heartfelt approach, much of the content remained the same. Trump again said he wants to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. He also reaffirmed his tough stance on immigration.
I've seen the attacks in France, in Belgium, in Germany, and all over the world. It is not compassionate, but reckless to allow uncontrolled entry from places where proper vetting cannot occur.
States.
None were more pleased to hear that than these Trump supporters in Michigan.
Really overwhelmingly positive. It was a fantastic speech. But you know what? I didn't expect anything less. I really didn't.
In Washington, the mood wasn't quite as electric. A day after his speech, these Trump critics are still not sold.
What bothered me the most about it is that he's giving us the same exact message every single day, but he's just changing the words.
You know, he can say whatever he wants, but then he'll turn around and do whatever he wants. And that's where the distrust is for me.
Trump is struggling with his approval rating. This speech could be the unlikely bridge between an increasingly divided America.
Well, how to read what we heard and saw last night. To do that, I'm joined from Washington now by Jeff Mason. He is a White House correspondent for Reuters, and he's president of the White House Correspondents Association. Jeff, it's good to have you on the show. And here at the big table is Julius von der Laar.
Good to be
Julius
with you,
was part of the 2008-2012 Obama campaign. Gentlemen, welcome. Jeff, let me start with you. How did the speech come across from where you are? Was it a real reset?
Well, it's hard to say whether it was a reset. I think that can only be determined when you see what happens in the weeks that followed the speech. But it was certainly a change in tone, and that was striking compared to his public remarks in the last few weeks since he's become president and since he was a candidate. Just very recently, a week or two ago, he gave a very strident rally in Florida. Last week, he gave a speech to the Conservative Action Committee known as CPAC, in which he lambasted the media again and said that the media was the enemy of the American people. You didn't hear that last night. You heard a much more subdued tone, a much more sort of tone that was more acceptable for the place in which he was giving his remarks.
Julius, we were talking earlier, what we saw last night, it certainly wasn't the candidate Trump that we knew.
Well, I agree fully on the tone, but the content was 100% Steve Bannon. Nothing changed. It was still the wall. It was America first, just in different terms. So I think nothing changed on that front. But he also had to deliver. We saw the polls that came out. Only 44% of Americans approve of Donald Trump. Lowest start any president had into his first term. So obviously they need to change something. And I think the different tone is one of the approaches that they try to take.
A different tone. What about a different audience, Jeff? Who was President Trump talking to last night?
Well, he had a lot of different audiences last night. First was the audience physically in the room, in the halls of the Capitol. Democrats and Republicans, lawmakers who he will need if he decides, as he no doubt will, to try and have some legislative victories in addition to these executive orders that he has signed in the first month in office. If he wants to do something on tax, if he wants to do something on health care, if he wants to do something on infrastructure, he'll need the support of lawmakers. And they were in the room, and that was a big part of his audience. The other audience was both the American people and the people of the world. The address to Congress, which is known as the State of the Union every other year, it's not known as that the first year that a president is in office, is really the biggest stage that he has sometimes all year long. And so people were listening from the Capitol here to the Capitol where you are sitting.
Yeah, and the White House had let it be known that this speech would be about unifying the nation. But Nancy Pelosi, the U.S. Democratic leader, she did not hide her disdain for the president's message last night. Today, her office released this statement. She says the president's speech was utterly disconnected from the cruel reality of his conduct. The Trump administration has spent 40 days putting Wall Street first, making America sick again, sowing fear in our communities and ensuring Russia maintains its grip on our security and our democracy. Well, we didn't even hear the word Russia in the speech last night, did we, Jeff?
Oh, we didn't. We didn't hear the word Russia. We didn't hear the word North Korea. We didn't hear a whole lot of foreign policy themes that sometimes one would expect to hear in that type of a speech. There actually also wasn't a long laundry list of policy proposals, which is something you also normally would hear in that type of a speech, particularly from a president who is just at the start of his term. What Leader Pelosi was probably trying to highlight there is, despite that change in tone for which President Trump has been praised, the content, at least from the Democrats' perspective, hadn't changed at all. And the actions of the last month, from her point of view, I think, as articulated in that statement, can't be wiped away by a shift, a rhetorical shift at the podium.
Yeah, and I mean, a content of confusion for the EU, for Germany, for the allies of the United States, right, Julius? I mean, nothing changed in terms of foreign policy either, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, Donald Trump recommitted to NATO, mentioned at least in a side note. But in the end, I thought the message was clear that it was America first. Let me just say on the domestic side, I thought there was so much energy, and we just heard about the different audiences there. Of course, Congress was one of the audiences, but the Democrats had quite the enthusiasm over the last 2 weeks when Congress was in recess, and we saw all those town halls happening all across the country. So I wonder how much of that swept back into the White House, and the Trump team said, well, we also need to put some reconciliatory messaging in there to make sure that those Republicans are feel a little bit more safe there.
Jeff, I mean, what do you say to that? You know, there have been all these reports about some very angry meetings, town hall meetings with members of Congress across the country. Do you think that had any influence on the message last night?
It may have. I think that any White House is also sensitive to poll numbers that are not very strong, and President Trump's poll numbers have not been very strong in the first month or so that he's been in office, and that's something that you can't just disregard. I think some of his advisors, perhaps Steve Bannon excluded, are interested in trying to moderate that tone as well, so that he can get more things done.
I'd like for us to compare two speeches. There's a tale of two speeches here, Trump's inauguration speech and the speech that he gave last night in the U.S. Capitol. Take a listen.
I am here tonight to deliver a message of unity and strength, and it is a message deeply delivered from my heart. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. We will no longer accept politicians who are all talk and no action. Solving these and so many other pressing problems will require us to work past the differences of party. Constantly complaining, but never doing anything about it. It will require us to tap into the American spirit that has overcome every challenge throughout our long and storied history. America is friends today with former enemies. We've made other countries rich, while the wealth, strength, and confidence of our country has dissipated over the horizon. Some of our closest allies decades ago fought on the opposite side of these terrible, terrible wars. This history should give us all faith in the possibilities for a better world. Hopefully.
Julius, if you were Trump's advisor right now and you were to see the clip there with these two very different speeches, what would you advise him to do moving forward?
Well, I think let's see how those poll numbers play out. I do think that they're looking at the poll numbers, and let's see how this plays out, and if his polling goes up. But look, I think he got what he needed to do in those first 40 days. Pass all those executive orders, got a lot of the nasty stuff out the way. So maybe this is his way to pivoting and sort of playing back to the center. But in the end, he needs to deliver. And at this point, all these 40 days, nothing has really happened. Hardly any bills have been passed. And so when midterms roll around and the campaign starts back up again in a year and a half, people will be looking for results. And tone is not going to change any policy.
Jeff, the poll numbers this morning, I saw one poll that said, I guess it was around 60 to 65% of Americans say that they feel more positive about the country after last night's speech. Does that make the speech a success?
Well, I think from the White House's perspective, it will, absolutely. I mean, they're looking for that kind of a positive reaction. It's funny, we had a briefing today with Sean Spicer, the president's spokesman, and he was asked very specifically about the two speeches that you just played excerpts from and the contrast between them and whether or not last night was meant to be a reset. He said it wasn't meant to be a reset, but I think generally, whether that's their on-the-record message or not, that you don't come up and have a speech like that where you change your tone so dramatically without having a purpose behind it.
I want us to take a look at what was the most emotional moment of the evening.
Ryan's legacy is etched into eternity. Thank you.
Obviously, that is the wife of a man named Ryan who died in Yemen. What were we looking at there, though, Julius? Is that a president showing that he is empathetic or that he can manipulate the emotions of a nation?
Well, first of all, I think on the part of the widow, it was a truly authentic moment. And I think the whole nation felt with her. For the White House to put her there, I think it is nothing uncommon for the White House to place guests of the president there. Of course, they use it. I think there's no question about it. And for Trump to be able to show those emotions and also have that script in the speech, I think it made him more likable in that moment. And I heard people say that this was the moment when he turned from Donald Trump into President Trump. Let's see if we can repeat that.
Yeah, we have been hearing that. Jeff, before we run out of time, I want to pull up the tweet that we got from Trump about 4 days ago regarding the White House Correspondents' Dinner on April 29th. Trump saying, "I will not be attending the White House Correspondents Association dinner this year. Please wish everyone well and have a great evening." Okay, that was his feeling 4 days ago. Are you expecting a kinder, gentler President Trump now? And if so, is there any chance that maybe he could end up coming to the dinner?
Well, the answer to your first question is I just don't know. The answer to your second question is actually also I don't know. He seems to be the type of person who changes his mind sometimes. But well, we will be having that dinner whether or not President Trump decides to come or not. The dinner is a celebration of journalism. It's a celebration of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It's a celebration of the good work that our members have done in political journalism, and it's also a celebration of scholarship winners, which is the next generation of our profession.
Yeah, I mean, you guys do excellent work. But is the invitation is still open, though, to the president, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Invitation is still open if he changes his mind.
All right. Jeff Mason, White House correspondent for Reuters and president of the White House Correspondents Association in Washington. Jeff, thank you very much for being on the day. We appreciate it. Come back to talk with us. I'm sure we'll have a reason.
My pleasure.
In the future. Julius, stay where you are. We're going to...
I bet we will.
Yes, we will. We're not done with you just yet. Let's talk about Trump's speech and social media. The reviews were mixed, but many people applauded at least the tone of the address. Some observers called it surprisingly, well, as Julia said, presidential. And that left some, like Adam Nagurney of the New York Times, wondering what this past month might have been like if Trump had adopted this bipartisan tone in his inauguration address. But others found the extreme change of tone implausible. Vermont Senator and former presidential candidate Bernie Sanders tweeted, "When Trump said we need to promote clean air and clean water, I had a hard time not laughing. Today he rolled back clean water rules." And as we've already heard, Nancy Pelosi, she was underwhelmed, Mr. President. She was also one of many Democratic congresswomen dressed in white, the color of the early 20th century women's suffrage movement. And that was to mark their opposition to what they see as the Republican Party's attempts to roll back women's rights, such as limiting access to abortion.